The folder on Ilhan Omar's desk looked innocent enough, but inside were immigration documents that would destroy the Trump family's anti-immigrant narrative forever. As Barron Trump launched into his prepared speech about border security and American values, Omar sat quietly, knowing that the young man attacking her refugee background was about to learn some uncomfortable truths about his own family's journey to America. The documents she was about to reveal would not only end this debate, they would end any hope Barron had of following in his father's political footsteps. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of the explosive political drama we cover. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when America's most privileged teenager learns that some family histories are more complicated than campaign talking points. This wasn't just another college debate. This was the moment when inherited privilege met lived experience, when campaign rhetoric collided with documented reality, and when the most carefully guarded secrets of America's most famous political family were about to be exposed by someone who understood immigration not as a talking point, but as a survival story. The Georgetown University Reagan Forum had been planning this debate for months. The event, titled American Immigration, Security versus Humanity, was designed to showcase different perspectives on one of the most contentious issues in American politics. What the organizers didn't know was that they had accidentally created the perfect storm for one of the most explosive political confrontations in recent memory. Barron Trump, now 18 and a freshman at Georgetown, had emerged as the most intellectually sophisticated member of the Trump family. Standing nearly 6 feet 8 inches and possessing a commanding presence that reminded everyone of his father's political charisma, Barron had spent his first semester carefully building his reputation as the future of conservative politics. Unlike his older siblings who had jumped immediately into business and political roles, Barron had chosen the academic route. He was majoring in political science with a minor in constitutional law, and his professors consistently praised his analytical abilities and his deep understanding of policy issues. His combination of Trump name recognition with apparent intellectual depth had made him a campus celebrity. The Georgetown Young Republicans had grown by 400% since his enrollment, and political operatives from both parties were already taking notice of his potential. Conservative media outlets regularly featured him in profiles about the next generation of conservative leadership, and his social media presence was carefully curated to show a more thoughtful, policy-focused version of Trump politics. Tonight's debate was supposed to be Barron's coming-out moment on the national stage. C-SPAN was broadcasting the event live, major political reporters were in attendance, and the Georgetown Political Science Department had positioned it as a showcase for serious policy discussion. This was Barron's opportunity to prove that he could engage in substantive political discourse while still defending his family's core positions. But Barron had made a critical error in preparation. He had agreed to debate Congresswoman Ilhan Omar without fully understanding the depth of her knowledge about immigration policy or her skill at political combat. More importantly, he had no idea that she had been conducting her own research into the Trump family's immigration history. Ilhan Omar, now 42 and serving her third term representing Minnesota's 5th congressional district, had traveled one of the most remarkable journeys in American political history. Born in Somalia during a period of civil war, she had spent 4 years in a refugee camp in Kenya before immigrating to the United States with her family when she was 12 years old. Her rise from refugee to Congresswoman had been meteoric and inspiring. She had learned English as her third language, worked her way through college while supporting her family, and became a community organizer before running for the Minnesota State Legislature. Her 2018 election to Congress had made her one of the first Muslim women to serve in the House of Representatives. But Omar's success had come with a price. She had faced constant attacks on her loyalty to America, her religious beliefs, and her immigrant background. Death threats were routine, and she required more security protection than almost any other member of Congress. She had learned to navigate hostile political environments while maintaining her principles and her commitment to the communities she represented. What made Omar particularly dangerous as a debate opponent wasn't just her personal experience with immigration or her political courage. It was her preparation and her understanding of her opponents. She had spent months researching the Trump family's immigration history, working with genealogical experts and immigration lawyers to build a comprehensive understanding of how the family had actually come to America. What she had discovered was explosive, a pattern of immigration experiences that directly contradicted every major argument the Trump family had made about immigration policy. The documents in her folder represented months of careful research, and she had been waiting for the perfect moment to use them. The debate was scheduled for 8 p.m. in Georgetown's Gaston Hall, a grand venue that had hosted presidents and prime ministers. The room was packed beyond capacity, with students filling every seat and standing along the walls. The energy was electric as the audience, since they were about to witness something historic. The format was straightforward. Each participant would give a 10-minute opening statement, followed by 20 minutes of back-and-forth discussion, and concluding with 5-minute closing statements. The moderator was Dr. Sarah Martinez, Georgetown's Dean of the School of Foreign Service, who had extensive experience managing high-stakes political discussions. Barron entered the hall to enthusiastic applause from conservative students, looking every inch the future political leader. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that emphasized his impressive height, and he moved with the natural confidence of someone who had grown up in the spotlight. His presence dominated the stage in a way that reminded everyone of his father's political charisma. Omar entered to equally enthusiastic applause from progressive students, wearing a professional blazer and her signature hijab. At 5 feet 4 inches, she was dwarfed by Barron's physical presence, but she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced down much more intimidating opponents than an 18-year-old college student. The visual contrast was striking and loaded with symbolism. Barron represented inherited privilege and political dynasty, while Omar embodied the American dream of immigrant success through hard work and determination. The stage was set for a clash between two very different visions of what America could be. Dr. Martinez opened with brief introductions and ground rules before inviting Barron to deliver his opening statement. He stood up to his full height, using his physical presence to command the room's attention, and began with the polished delivery of someone who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. Thank you, Dr. Martinez, and thank you to Georgetown University for hosting this important discussion, Barron began, his voice carrying easily through the large hall. Tonight, we're here to discuss one of the most critical issues facing our nation, immigration policy and border security. He paused, looking out at the audience with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his right to speak on any topic. I want to be clear from the outset. I support legal immigration. America has always been a nation of immigrants, and we should welcome those who come here legally, who respect our laws, and who want to contribute to our society. It was a carefully crafted opening designed to sound reasonable while setting up his main arguments. But we must also recognize that immigration without proper controls and security measures threatens the very fabric of our society. We need borders that are secure, immigration laws that are enforced, and policies that prioritize the interests of American citizens. Barron's voice grew stronger as he warmed to his theme, clearly comfortable with arguments he had been making for months. Some politicians, he continued, glancing briefly at Omar, want to portray any support for border security as somehow anti-immigrant or racist. This is not only false, it's dangerous. Supporting law and order, supporting controlled immigration, supporting policies that put Americans first, these are not controversial positions. These are common-sense positions that the majority of Americans support. He gestured toward Omar without naming her directly. We cannot allow emotional appeals and personal stories to override the need for rational, evidence-based immigration policy. Yes, there are tragic cases and difficult situations, but policy must be based on what's best for America as a whole, not on individual circumstances. The argument was sophisticated and well-delivered, hitting all the talking points that had made Trump immigration policy popular with conservative voters while avoiding the more inflammatory rhetoric that had gotten his father in trouble. America has been generous to the world's refugees and immigrants, but that generosity must be balanced with our responsibility to our own citizens. We cannot help everyone, and we cannot ignore the costs and challenges that come with large-scale immigration. Barron concluded with what sounded like a direct challenge to Omar's approach to immigration policy. Tonight, I hope we can have an honest discussion about these issues, one based on facts rather than emotion, on policy rather than personal stories, and on America's interests rather than global humanitarian concerns. He sat down to enthusiastic applause from conservative students, clearly pleased with his performance. The opening had been everything his team had hoped for: substantive, reasonable sounding, and politically effective. Omar's response was immediate and personal. "Thank you, Dr. Martinez, and thank you, Barron, for that opening statement," she began, her voice carrying a slight accent that reminded everyone of her immigrant background. "I want to start by addressing something you said about emotional appeals and personal stories." She looked directly at Barron, her expression serious but not hostile. "You suggest that immigration policy should be based on facts rather than emotion, on policy rather than personal stories. But I would argue that personal stories are facts. They are the human reality of what immigration policy actually means." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "When you talk about border security and controlled immigration, you're talking about real people with real families facing real dangers. When you talk about putting Americans first, you're talking about policies that affect real communities and real lives." Omar walked closer to the front of the stage, engaging more directly with the audience. "I'm not here tonight as just a policy expert or a political theorist. I am here as someone who has lived the immigration experience. I have been a refugee. I have been a person seeking safety and opportunity in America. I have experienced what it means when immigration policy is compassionate and when it is cruel." She turned back to Barron. "You say that policy should be based on what's best for America as a whole. I agree. But I would argue that America is strongest when it lives up to its highest ideals, when it welcomes people who are fleeing persecution, when it provides opportunities for those willing to work hard, when it remembers that we are all part of the same human family." Omar's voice carried the passion of someone speaking from personal experience. "You mention the costs and challenges of immigration, but you don't mention the benefits. You don't mention the contributions that immigrants make to American society. You don't mention the businesses we start, the taxes we pay, the communities we build, the children we raise as proud Americans." She paused, then delivered what sounded like a direct challenge to Barron's worldview. "And you don't mention that immigration has always been part of America's story, including, I suspect, your own family's story." It was a subtle but clear reference to the research she had conducted, though she hadn't yet revealed what she had discovered. "So yes, let's have an honest discussion about immigration. But let's make sure that honesty includes the full truth about what immigration means and what it has always meant to America." Omar returned to her seat to equally enthusiastic applause from progressive students. Her opening had been more personal and emotional than Barron's, but it had also been more authentic and compelling. The back-and-forth discussion began with Dr. Martinez asking about specific policy proposals. Barron advocated for increased border security, merit-based immigration systems, and stricter enforcement of existing laws. Omar countered with arguments about asylum protections, family reunification, and the economic benefits of immigration. For the first 15 minutes, the debate proceeded along predictable lines. Barron presented his arguments with academic precision and political sophistication, while Omar responded with personal experience and moral passion. Both participants were clearly well-prepared and skilled at political discourse. But the tone began to shift when Dr. Martinez asked about refugee policy and asylum procedures. Barron's response revealed the limitations of his theoretical approach to immigration issues. "Dr. Martinez, the asylum system in this country is broken," Barron began, standing up again to use his height advantage. "It's being abused by people who are not genuine refugees, but who are using asylum claims to circumvent our immigration laws." He looked directly at Omar as he continued. "We need to be much more selective about who we accept as refugees. We need to prioritize people who are truly fleeing persecution, not people who are simply looking for economic opportunities." The comment was clearly directed at Omar, suggesting that her own refugee status might have been questionable. The reality is that many people who claim to be refugees are actually economic migrants who are taking advantage of our generosity. We need policies that can distinguish between genuine refugees and people who are gaming the system. Omar's expression had hardened during Barron's response, but she remained composed as she replied. "Barron, I think you misunderstand what the refugee experience actually involves," she said, her voice carrying a new edge. "You talk about people gaming the system as if seeking safety and opportunity is somehow dishonest or illegitimate." She leaned forward slightly, her intensity increasing. "Let me tell you what being a refugee actually means. It means leaving everything you know and love because staying would mean death. It means spending years in camps with no certainty about your future. It means starting over in a new country with nothing but hope and determination." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "You suggest that we need to be more selective about who we accept as refugees. But who do you think should make those decisions? And what do you think qualifies someone to determine who deserves safety and who doesn't?" The questions were pointed and personal, clearly designed to highlight Barron's lack of real-world experience with the issues he was discussing. "You talk about people taking advantage of our generosity, but you don't seem to understand what that generosity actually means to people who receive it. You don't understand the gratitude, the commitment, the determination to contribute that comes from being given a second chance at life." Omar paused, then delivered what sounded like a direct challenge to Barron's authority to speak on immigration issues. "And you don't seem to understand that the policies you're advocating would have prevented many of America's most successful immigrants from ever arriving here, including, I suspect, members of your own family." It was the second reference to the Trump family's immigration history, and this time Barron noticed. "Congresswoman Omar, I'm not sure what you're suggesting about my family's history," he said, his voice carrying a slight defensive edge for the first time. "But I would remind you that there's a difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration, between following proper procedures and circumventing the system." Omar smiled slightly, as if she had been waiting for exactly this response. "That's an interesting distinction, Barron. I'm glad you brought up the importance of following proper procedures and legal processes." She reached for the folder on her desk, the innocent-looking collection of documents that had been sitting there throughout the debate, "because I think the audience might be interested in learning about how your own family navigated the immigration system when they came to America." The room fell silent as the implications of Omar's words became clear. She was about to reveal information about the Trump family's immigration history that apparently contradicted Barron's arguments. "I don't know what you think you know about my family's immigration story," Barron said, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "But I would remind you that my family has been in America for generations." "Oh, I know quite a bit about your family's immigration story," Omar replied, opening the folder and removing several documents. "In fact, I've spent considerable time researching exactly how the Trump family came to America, and I think the details might surprise you." She held up the first document, a genealogical chart that was clearly visible to the cameras. "This is a family tree showing the Trump family's immigration history. As you can see, your family's American story is much more recent than you might think." Barron's expression had changed from confident to concerned as he realized that Omar had come prepared with specific information about his family's background. "Your great-great-grandfather, Friedrich Trump, immigrated to the United States from Germany in 1885. He was 16 years old, had no money, no job prospects, and no family in America to support him." Omar's voice took on the tone of someone presenting evidence rather than making arguments. According to immigration records from Ellis Island, Friedrich Trump was initially flagged by immigration officials as a potential public charge, someone who might become dependent on government assistance. She held up another document, this one bearing official stamps and signatures. "This is his immigration record. As you can see, he was only admitted to the United States after intervention by a German-American Aid Society, which vouched for his character and promised to help him find employment." The parallels to modern immigration debates were becoming clear, and the audience was beginning to understand where Omar was heading with this information. "But here's where it gets interesting," Omar continued, pulling out another document. "Friedrich Trump didn't just come to America and immediately become a model citizen. He spent several years moving around the country, working various jobs, and trying to establish himself. She looked directly at Barron, whose discomfort was becoming increasingly visible. In fact, according to these records, your great-great-grandfather spent time in the Pacific Northwest during the gold rush, operating what contemporary sources describe as a boarding house that may have also served as a brothel. The revelation hit the audience like a physical blow. Several students gasped audibly, and even Dr. Martinez looked surprised by the specificity of Omar's information. "Are you seriously going to attack my family's history from over a century ago?" Barron asked, his voice rising for the first time in the debate. "I'm not attacking your family's history," Omar replied calmly. "I'm simply providing context for your arguments about immigration policy. You see, your great-great-grandfather's story is actually quite typical of immigrant experiences, then and now." She continued with her methodical presentation. Friedrich Trump came to America with nothing, relied on immigrant aid societies for support, worked in industries that many people considered morally questionable, and moved around the country looking for opportunities. In other words, he did exactly what millions of immigrants do today, whatever it took to survive and build a better life. The parallels were becoming impossible to ignore. "But there's more," Omar said, reaching for another document. Friedrich Trump's immigration story doesn't end with his arrival in America. In 1901, he returned to Germany with his American-born wife and children, apparently planning to stay permanently. She held up what appeared to be a German government document. This is a letter from the German government to Friedrich Trump, dated 1905. In it, German officials inform him that he is not welcome to return to Germany because he had left the country originally to avoid military service. The implications were staggering. Omar was revealing that the Trump family patriarch had been what would now be called a draft dodger. So Friedrich Trump found himself in an interesting position. He couldn't return to Germany, but he had already established a life there. What do you think he did? Barron remained silent, clearly unwilling to engage with the direction of Omar's presentation. He applied for re-entry to the United States, claiming that he had always intended to return and that Germany was just a temporary visit. In other words, he became exactly the kind of immigrant that your family now wants to exclude, someone whose story was complicated, whose motives were mixed, and whose loyalty to America was questioned. Omar's presentation was methodical and devastating. She was using the Trump family's own history to demonstrate the hypocrisy of their current immigration positions. "But we're not done with the Trump family immigration story," she continued, pulling out more documents. "Let's talk about your grandmother, Mary MacLeod Trump, who immigrated from Scotland in 1930. She held up an immigration document bearing official seals. Mary MacLeod came to America during the Great Depression, when the country was experiencing massive unemployment and economic hardship. According to these records, she initially came on a visitor's visa, but overstayed and remained in the country illegally for several years. The revelation that Barron's grandmother had been an undocumented immigrant was devastating to his family's anti-immigrant narrative. In fact, Mary MacLeod only regularized her immigration status when she married your grandfather, Fred Trump, in 1936. So for approximately 6 years, the future First Lady and your grandmother was exactly what your family now calls an illegal immigrant. Omar's voice carried no malice, but her words were surgically precise. And here's the really interesting part. During her time as an undocumented immigrant, Mary MacLeod worked as a domestic servant for wealthy families in New York. She was, in the terminology your family now uses, taking jobs that could have gone to American citizens. The audience was completely silent now, riveted by the systematic deconstruction of the Trump family's immigration mythology. So let me ask you, Barron, if your great-great-grandfather Friedrich Trump had applied for asylum in America today, claiming that he couldn't return to Germany because of persecution for avoiding military service, would you support his application? The question was rhetorical but devastating. If your grandmother Mary MacLeod had been discovered living illegally in the United States during the 1930s, would you support her deportation? Another rhetorical question that highlighted the impossibility of Barron's position. And if a young woman from Scotland came to America today on a visitor's visa, overstayed for 6 years, worked without authorization, and only gained legal status through marriage, would you consider her the kind of immigrant that America should welcome? Omar's systematic questioning was exposing the fundamental hypocrisy of the Trump family's immigration positions. The truth is, Barron, your family's immigration story is remarkably similar to the stories of millions of immigrants today. They came seeking opportunity, they sometimes bent the rules to survive, they worked hard to build better lives, and they eventually became Americans. She gathered her documents into a neat pile. The only difference between your family's immigration story and the stories of people you now want to exclude is about 100 years and the fact that your family was white and came from Europe. The racial dimension of immigration policy had been implicit throughout the debate, but Omar's statement made it explicit. So, when you talk about merit-based immigration, when you talk about people who respect our laws, when you talk about immigrants who contribute to American society, I want you to remember that your own family would not have met those standards. Omar stood up, matching Barron's earlier use of physical presence to command attention. Your great-great-grandfather avoided military service and may have operated a brothel. Your grandmother lived illegally in the United States for 6 years. But they were still able to build successful lives and contribute to American society. Her voice grew stronger as she built to her conclusion. That's not a criticism of your family, Barron. That's a celebration of what America can be when it gives people opportunities to succeed despite their imperfect circumstances. She looked directly at him. The question is, are you willing to extend that same generosity to immigrants today, or do you think that the opportunities that allowed your family to succeed should be denied to others? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Omar had just used the Trump family's own immigration history to argue for more generous immigration policies, turning Barron's arguments completely upside down. Furthermore, Omar continued, not waiting for Barron's response. Let's talk about the contributions that immigrants make to American society, including the contributions your family made. She pulled out another document. This is a business record from the early 1900s, showing that Friedrich Trump's businesses employed dozens of people and contributed significantly to the local economy in the Pacific Northwest. He was, in other words, exactly the kind of immigrant entrepreneur that we should welcome today. The irony was perfect. Omar was using the Trump family's immigrant success story to argue for policies that Donald Trump opposed. And Mary MacLeod, your grandmother, didn't just work as a domestic servant. She also volunteered with immigrant aid societies, helping other Scottish immigrants adjust to life in America. She understood the importance of immigrant communities supporting each other. Omar's voice carried genuine admiration for the Trump family's immigrant ancestors. So here's what I find so puzzling about your family's current immigration positions. Your ancestors were exactly the kind of immigrants that made America great. They were entrepreneurial, they were resourceful, they were willing to work hard and take risks. She paused for effect. But the policies you're advocating would prevent people like your own ancestors from coming to America today. The logical contradiction was impossible to escape. You talk about merit-based immigration, but your great-great-grandfather had no special skills when he arrived. You talk about people who respect our laws, but your grandmother lived here illegally for 6 years. You talk about people who contribute to American society, but both of your ancestors needed support from immigrant communities to succeed. Omar's systematic deconstruction of Barron's arguments was complete. So, I have a simple question for you, Barron. If the immigration policies you're advocating had been in place 100 years ago, would your family have been able to come to America? The question was devastating because everyone in the room knew the answer. And if your family wouldn't have been able to come to America under your preferred policies, what gives you the right to deny that same opportunity to other families today? Barron sat in stunned silence, clearly unprepared for such a comprehensive challenge to his family's immigration narrative. The young man who had entered the debate with supreme confidence was now confronting the reality that his own family's story contradicted everything he had been arguing. I think there's a difference between the immigration challenges of the past and the immigration challenges of today. He finally managed, his voice lacking its earlier authority. Really? Omar asked, her tone suggesting genuine curiosity about how he would explain this distinction. What difference is that? Well, the security concerns are different now. The economic pressures are different. The social challenges are different. It was a weak response, and everyone in the room could tell that Barron was grasping for arguments that would allow him to maintain his position despite the evidence Omar had presented. Are they different? Omar pressed. Because when your great-great-grandfather arrived in 1885, America was also dealing with economic challenges. There were concerns about foreign anarchists and political radicals. There were worries about immigrants taking jobs from American workers. She pulled out a final document, this one appearing to be a historical newspaper clipping. This is from a New York newspaper in 1885, the same year Friedrich Trump arrived. The headline reads, "German immigrants threaten American workers, foreign laborers undercutting wages and taking jobs." The parallel to modern immigration debates was unmistakable. So the concerns you're raising about immigration today are the same concerns that were raised about your family's immigration 140 years ago. The difference is that your family was given the chance to prove that those concerns were wrong. Omar's final point was devastatingly simple. All I'm asking is that you extend the same opportunity to immigrant families today that America extended to your family then. She sat down, her presentation complete. She had just delivered one of the most systematic and effective takedowns of anti-immigrant arguments in recent memory, using the Trump family's own history to make her case. The audience erupted in sustained applause, with even some conservative students clapping for the sheer effectiveness of Omar's presentation. She had taken Barron's theoretical arguments and demolished them with concrete evidence from his own family's experience. Dr. Martinez tried to restore order and move the debate forward, but the damage was done. Omar had fundamentally changed the terms of the discussion, and Barron was left trying to defend positions that had been revealed as hypocritical. The remaining discussion time was dominated by Barron's attempts to recover from Omar's devastating presentation. He argued that immigration policies needed to evolve with changing circumstances, that security concerns were more serious now than in the past, and that America couldn't have unlimited immigration. But his arguments sounded hollow after Omar's systematic demonstration of how his own family had benefited from exactly the kind of generous immigration policies he was now opposing. When it came time for closing statements, Barron attempted to refocus the debate on policy rather than personal history. "I want to thank Congresswoman Omar for her research into my family's background," he began, his voice carrying a defensive edge. "But I would remind everyone that immigration policy should be based on current circumstances, not historical examples." He tried to regain his earlier confidence. "The fact that my family came to America generations ago doesn't change the reality that we need secure borders and controlled immigration today. We need policies that serve America's interests in the 21st century, not policies based on 19th century examples." It was a reasonable attempt to minimize the damage, but it fell flat after Omar's presentation. Omar's closing statement was brief and powerful. "Barron, you're right that immigration policy should be based on current circumstances, but it should also be based on American values, values like opportunity, generosity, and the belief that people should be judged by their character and their contributions, not by their country of origin." She looked directly at him. "Your family's immigration story is a beautiful example of what America can be when it lives up to those values. I hope that someday you'll be willing to extend that same generosity to other families who are seeking the same opportunities your ancestors found here." The debate concluded with Omar having delivered one of the most effective political presentations in recent memory. She had used Barron's own family history to argue for more generous immigration policies, turning his arguments completely upside down and exposing the hypocrisy of the Trump family's immigration positions. The aftermath was immediate and explosive. Within minutes of the debate's conclusion, clips of Omar's presentation were being shared across social media platforms. The hashtag Trump family immigration began trending as Americans learned details about the Trump family's immigration history that had never been widely discussed. Conservative media outlets struggled to defend Barron's performance or counter Omar's arguments. The evidence she had presented was too well documented and too specific to dismiss, and the parallels between the Trump family's immigration story and modern immigration debates were too clear to ignore. Liberal outlets, meanwhile, praised Omar's presentation as a masterclass in political argumentation. Legal and immigration experts noted the thoroughness of her research and the effectiveness of her strategy in using personal history to make policy arguments. For Barron himself, the debate represented a humbling experience that would likely influence his future political development. The young man who had entered the debate with supreme confidence about his family's immigration positions was forced to confront the reality that those positions were contradicted by his own family's history. The broader implications of the debate were significant for American immigration policy discussions. Omar had demonstrated that many of the arguments against immigration were contradicted by the actual experiences of immigrant families, including those of politicians who now oppose generous immigration policies. The debate also highlighted the importance of historical context in policy discussions. Omar's research had shown that immigration challenges and concerns were remarkably consistent across different time periods, but that America had historically benefited from welcoming immigrants despite those concerns. Perhaps most importantly, the debate had personalized immigration policy in a way that made abstract arguments much more concrete. By showing how immigration policies would have affected a specific family, the Trump family, Omar had made the human consequences of those policies impossible to ignore. The confrontation between Barron Trump and Ilhan Omar became more than just a college debate. It became a powerful reminder that immigration has always been part of America's story, and that the families who now oppose immigration often owe their own success to the same generous policies they now want to deny to others. In the end, Omar's folder of documents had done more than win a debate. They had exposed the fundamental hypocrisy of modern immigration politics and reminded America that its strength has always come from its willingness to welcome people seeking better lives, regardless of where they came from or what challenges they faced. The lesson was clear. In America, immigration is not just a policy issue. It's a family issue, and sometimes it takes someone with the courage to do the research to remind everyone of that fundamental truth.